Hey guys, it's Mike here, and in this video, I'm going to be reviewing Stranger Things Season 3, which just came out recently on Netflix. Now, I've wanted to talk about Stranger Things on multiple occasions in the past, but I haven't really had the opportunity until now. So with Stranger Things Season 3 having come out, what I'm going to be doing in this video is I'm going to be discussing my experience with the series, what I thought about Seasons 1 and 2, and then getting into my review of Season 3. So let me begin right now with my experience with the series. So I started watching Stranger Things when it first debuted on Netflix years back, and I really liked it. The 80s nostalgia was very much on display, especially when it came down to the structure and the story of the show. Featuring a collection of really talented child actors, as well as some well-known adult actors, these people in their small town faced off against horrors from another dimension, much like a Stephen King story such as It. And for me, that kind of story was definitely right up my alley. Now, with Season 1, this is obviously where everyone got into the show, and I really liked the story. The dynamic between the psychic child Eleven and Mike, as well as the others, was fun, especially how they utilized Eleven's powers and how they hid her, much like in the movie E.T. And of course, there are tons of references to 1980s cinema as well as culture, which have continued to be one of the biggest themes of the show moving forward. I also really love David Harbour as the cop, Jim Hopper, who at first had kind of given up on life because of his rough past, but because Winona Ryder's character Joyce refused to stop searching for her son Will after he disappeared, he gets involved in the story and starts to have something greater to live for. Then of course, there was the evil government organization run by Matthew Modine as Father, who were trying to cover up everything that they were doing with Eleven in their experiments, as well as how they were exploring the creepy mirror world of the Upside Down, which I also think was a pretty cool setting that harkens back to stuff from H.P. Lovecraft and of course Stephen King. Overall, it was just a great first season of television that many have described as lightning in a bottle, which leads into Season 2. Now when it comes to Season 2, I also really liked it. The characters had grown a little older by this point, and there was a lot more personal drama going on. Some of it was also really creepy, such as what was going on with Will, who is still connected to the Mind Flayer after being taken out of the Upside Down, and actually had his body taken over at one point. There was also a subplot with Eleven, who was trying to figure out where she really came from and what happened with her mother. And while many of the character dynamics were still great here, such as between Harper and Eleven, and they even brought in Sean Astin from Lord of the Rings and the Goonies as a romantic interest for Joyce, I feel that the season overall wasn't really as good or cohesive as Season 1, with some of it kind of feeling unnecessary or like it could have been cut down, such as the subplot with the other psychics and the lost sister that I know a lot of people really didn't like. But overall, I still think it's good and worth watching, and delivers on much of what the fans have come to expect of this series. So going into Season 3, I was looking forward to it, although I wasn't quite as excited as I was going into Season 2. But nonetheless, I still really ended up liking this one. The story of Season 3 takes place in Hawkins during the summer of 1985, and it focuses on the main group of kids as they're continuing to grow and develop as teenagers, as well as the adults who are also trying to move on with their lives. However, the Mind Flayer, the big bad eldritch abomination from the Upside Down, still has a hold within their world after the last season, and is trying to take on physical form with the help of Billy, as he takes on the antagonistic role and other host bodies. Meanwhile, the evil Russians from the Soviet Union have secretly invaded Hawkins, using the mall as their base of operations, and attempting to open up the rift from the Upside Down. The kids and adults alike break up into different teams to try and stop these threats from destroying their town, and to put an end to the terrors from the Upside Down once and for all. So this season definitely had a lot of things I liked, although there are certain things that I didn't like. So let me first get into the things I liked before moving into the things that I didn't. Now first off, potentially the biggest selling point for this series would have to be the child actors and the characters they play, such as Eleven, Mike, Will, and the rest of the group. And like with many other child actors who could be pretty rough at times depending upon what role they're placed in or who does the casting in this series was excellent, and they give really good and believable performances, especially Millie Bobby Brown as Eleven, and she becomes a way more realized person in this season. first starting off as kind of a MacGuffin or plot device, and becoming more of an actual person over the course of the series. And after what happened in the last season, she and Mike are in a relationship here, with the kids all now being teenagers and having grown from where they were in the first season. And that's one of the big themes of this season, which is growing up from childhood, moving on from certain childish things, and getting into relationships and maturing more as individuals, as well as figuring out who they really are as people. So it's much of a coming-of-age story here. And a good amount of time is spent on that, as well as some strife in the relationship, specifically between Eleven and Mike, as well as Max and Lucas. And one of the big things that happens early on in the show, especially during the first half, is that Max is becoming a bigger force in Eleven's life and is influencing her in certain ways, not all of which I feel like are necessarily positive, since she is one of the biggest contributing factors to them having these issues and breaking up. But there are other characters who are also getting into relationships, such as Dustin, who comes back from science camp and tells everyone how he has a girlfriend who's actually a Mormon and is a long-distance relationship. But no one really believes him, especially after she doesn't answer when he uses his Cerebro or his own portable radio tower to try and speak with her. However naturally, which I know many other fans called, she ends up showing up at the end and proving everyone wrong, as well as contributing in an important way. And then we get into David Harbour and Winona Ryder as Hopper and Joyce. And with Hopper, one of the big things with him is that he's dealing with Eleven growing up. She's of course in a relationship with Mike, and the two of them are together a lot, which he doesn't really like, and he gives Mike a very threatening talk, which also leads to relationship issues between him and Eleven. He's also trying to get into a relationship with Joyce, but it's not really working out too well. Because after the death of Sean Astin's character Bob in the last season, she's still grieving and depressed over it, so she can't open up and have a relationship. However, when the two of them stumble upon what's going on with the Russians, they're forced together in an alliance, and we see that the two of them clearly have some deep-seated emotional connection that they're not wanting to address, which manifests in them bickering for pretty much the entire runtime of the season. And you even have Hopper's friend Murray once again reprising his role from the last season so that he can help out and translate between Alexei and the other characters, and basically saying screw and get it over with, which I think most of the audience agrees with. But also, speaking of the Russians and the antagonists of this season, you can definitely see the 80s influence here, as we have a character who is essentially an evil Russian Terminator who dresses like Arnold Schwarzenegger from the Terminator and even has a pretty similar haircut. And he's basically the muscle of the Russians who gets into fights with Hopper and enforces their rule, as well as intimidating the mayor, who is played by Carrie Elways from The Princess Bride and Saw, who I also really enjoyed in this season as he plays a sleazy, crooked mayor who's working with the Russians. Although, like I said, the main antagonists of this season come down to the Mind Flayer and the person he selects to help him achieve his goals, who is Billy, Max's brother, who was introduced in season 2. And I like the direction that they went in with Billy's character in this season. While we did get some development in the last season about why he is the way he is, being a bully and borderline homicidal at points, in this season they get way more into it as Eleven goes inside of his mind like she did with her mother in season 2, and sees how basically his mother abandoned him after she was beaten and he started taking it out on other people, including his own sister. So I think they did an even better job of fleshing him out, and his actor Dacre Montgomery also gave a really great performance as the character here. And even though he does some pretty messed up things during the season, by the end of his story arc, you do feel sympathetic for him, especially when it comes down to his heroic sacrifice and kind of redemption at the end. Some other character dynamics I also liked here are Steve and Dustin, which was an unlikely pairing from season 2, especially considering how Steve was portrayed as kind of a bully douchebag from the first season, but over the course of the series, and especially in the past 2 seasons, has become a heroic character and a friend of the main group, giving him a pretty satisfying character arc. And another character who becomes a friend and seemingly a romantic interest for him at first, is the character of Robin, played by Maya Hawke, who the entire season I was thinking looked incredibly familiar, and is actually the daughter of Uma Thurman and Ethan Hawke. And I enjoyed her character this season. She's kind of strange and nerdy, so she fits right in with the other members of the cast. And they have some good interactions. And at first, she and Steve don't seem to really get along very well. However, over time it's revealed that Robin was kind of obsessed with Steve in high school, and that he develops romantic feelings for her. However, toward the end of the season, there's a twist involving that obsession and her sexuality, where it's revealed that she's actually a lesbian. And she wasn't really into Steve, she was more attracted to the women that were attracted to Steve. And it was interesting that Steve seemed to be largely fine with this, considering the time frame and how easily it could have gone in a very different direction. As far as the execution goes, I feel like this could have been done a little bit better though, because of the way they did it almost made it come off as kind of like a bait and switch. And some other characters I thought were pretty good in this season were the Russian scientist Alexei, who doesn't speak any English, but nonetheless he still ends up being a really funny and entertaining character throughout, kind of subverting the evil Russian expectation that was established throughout the season, and not necessarily being someone who is totally for their cause. And his dynamic with the conspiracy theorist Murray, who speaks Russian, was pretty fun, especially when they end up going to the carnival, which sadly would be Alexei's last scene in the series, as he's killed. But really, one of the reasons why this season, why this series has been so great so far, comes down to the direction of the Duffer Brothers. Not only do they direct and frame scenes in a really great way, but they have a very nostalgic 80s style, which really lends itself to the cinematography, which is only increased with each season. And they have some really great looking scenes here, such as a cool fight scene in the Hall of Mirrors, which is a throwback to the Bruce Lee movie Enter the Dragon. And these guys are not only able to capture tension and drama really well, but also humor. And this season really goes all out with the humor, as there's a lot of funny scenes, and funny interactions between many of the main characters, which I feel like works better here than it would have in the previous 2 seasons, because after observing these characters for 2 seasons, they're a lot more endearing to us, and we're able to give it a lot more leeway in terms of comedy. Kind of like Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade. And speaking of 1980s movie references, again, this is loaded with them. There's references to Terminator, The Goonies, It, Star Wars, Back to the Future, which plays in the movie theater at multiple points during the season, Day of the Dead, The Thing, and especially Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which seems to be a really big influence for the direction of this season, as we have Billy abducting people, bringing them to this factory, and having the Mind Flayer basically swap out their minds, and then turn them into components of his own body, which is pretty creepy and dark, especially when you see a lot of the people who end up getting killed. And I think another reason why this season ended up working out so well would also have to come down to the episode length itself. Unlike many of the Netflix Marvel series, for example, which kind of overstay their welcome and have way too much padding in order to fill the 12 to 13 episode ratio, this season kept it down to 8, which is actually one less than the previous season, although I wouldn't say the pacing is exactly perfect here, but it's definitely better than it could have been. However, this season wasn't all good, and it wasn't exactly perfect, as I'm going to get into right now. So my first biggest problem with this season would have to be the fact that some of the subplots are pretty unconnected for most of the season. You know, we had the subplot with Dustin, Steve, and Robin as they infiltrate the evil underground Russian base in order to try and become American heroes, which is entertaining and definitely plays up on the camp and corny factor of 1980s film. But then at the same time, we also have the subplot involving the Mind Flayer and Billy, while the Mind Flayer is trying to create his own corporal form within this universe so that he can kill Eleven. And then we have Hopper and Joyce as they're escorting Alexei, or Smirnov as Hopper likes to call him, and trying to get information out of him and trying to destroy the machine to open up the rift. And a lot of these things don't really come together or form in any cohesive, connective way until pretty much the end of the season. And even then, the connections between some of them isn't really established as well as it could have been, to where when they eventually shut the rift between here and the Upside Down, and the Mind Flayer just instantly drops dead, it seems like there's kind of a disconnect there. And then you have the subplot with Billy and Mike's mom, where he's trying to get with her and all the women want to be with him, and then just goes nowhere and it's pretty much dropped. And the same thing with Nancy and her trying to figure out why all of these rats are eating the fertilizer, and why this old woman that they meet is also eating fertilizer. And they never really explain the connection between that and how they're all fusing into the Mind Flayer. And there's also some things from season 2 that aren't really addressed here, such as Matthew Modine's character Father, who was basically said to be alive in the last season, and then it just ended up going nowhere for that season in here. And then you also have Eleven's lost sister and the group of psychics, who I thought maybe she was going to recruit to help her fight the Mind Flayer at the end of the season. You know, they basically have an army fused into one evil being, so I thought maybe they would have an army of psychics, but that's never even brought up again, which I guess could be due to backlash that many fans had about the episode and the involvement from the last season. And also, like I hinted at before with the corniness and the camp factor, some of the writing and decisions don't always make the most sense. Like certain character choices, the fact that the groups don't really interact as much as they really could to try and get help from one another, sometimes the way that Eleven's powers are used, where I feel like she could have easily just walked into the Russian base and soloed all of them and fixed a lot of this much sooner than it happened. But the season really leans into 1980s tropes and uses a lot of movie logic, so some of this could be intentional on the part of the Duffer Brothers. And another thing that I should probably bring up and mention, because it's so apparent in this season, is the product placement, and it's really obnoxious at times. Not only does a huge section of the season take place in a mall, so they're constantly going in and out of stores like the Gap, but you constantly see tons of other products, especially with New Coke, which I feel like must have been some kind of tie-in to the season, considering the fact that New Coke once again released recently. It just so happens to be in tons of scenes here, including one scene that's basically dedicated to being an advertisement for the drink, where naturally the logo is constantly staring us in the face and telling us we need to buy this drink right now. And it's not exactly done in a fun Wayne's World kind of way, where they're just covered in brand logos and they're making fun of the fact that these advertisements happen. It just seems like they're straight up doing product placement. So overall, Stranger Things Season 3 is pretty great, an improvement from the last season. Although I still prefer the first season the most, this was another great addition to the story and another fun adventure for these beloved characters. It's already been confirmed that there's going to be another season, which may very well be the last, and I'm looking forward to it. I'd like to see where the story takes these characters next, and how they wrap up certain threads that are left hanging. Either way, I definitely recommend this series for those who are on the fence, or who enjoyed the previous seasons. It's definitely worth checking out. I'm going to give Stranger Things Season 3 an 8 out of 10, although I could perhaps go as high as an 8.5. So have you guys seen Stranger Things Season 3? And if so, what do you think about it? Let me know down below. Also, if you're new to this channel, then don't forget to subscribe and enable notifications so that you can see all of my videos right away when they come out. And make sure to stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future.
Yeah, and you better subscribe.